Hello and welcome to Overcome, a mental health podcast, a safe place for you to tell your story. I'm very excited for today's guest. I'd like to welcome Jon McLeod to the show. Jon is a career and life coach and public speaker, and he is big on helping out as many people as he can. And from here, I'm just going to turn the time over to Jon and let him tell his story.
Well, Travis, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to be here. Uh, I am from Brooklyn, New York. And if you're not familiar with Brooklyn, New York, just think of the movies. If you're from the LA side, think of Compton. It looks like that in some places, and it's like that in some places. So you can imagine that there's not a lot of mental health conversations going on where I'm from. And I wasn't taught about it. I'm a believer in God, faith-based man. So I was taught, and it was the blessing of learning how to pray was something that saved my life early on. Um, Grew up around gang violence, I've been almost killed several times. I've been guns pointed at, knives slashed at, that type of thing. It's been crazy, but all of those things I believe that have led me to this avenue of mental health, because I was always a person that was deeply invested in the way people think, why they make the decisions that they do. And that journey of going through life like that, where everybody's always surviving in some way, shape, or form, led me to understanding and locking into, well, everybody's actually in pain, but they're expressing their pain in multiple ways. Some people express their pain when they're in survival mode by grinding out. I'm going to work 2, 3, 4 jobs because I have to. Others say, I'm going to turn to violence. Others say, I'm going to turn to drugs. People say, like, whatever, when people are dealing with pain and they have to very much figure out an outlet or a conduit to get that pain out, they will do almost anything. And most people are products of their environments. But the big underlying thing, Travis, I want everybody to understand and know is that is every choice you make belongs to you. The environment isn't something that you can change, so to speak, to a degree, but every choice that you make affects you and comes from you and is representative of you. And just because you made a few mistakes or even a million mistakes doesn't disqualify you from being able to go after and get better mental health for yourself. And just because you're dealing with something and feel down, out, depressed, anxious, imposter syndrome, those things don't disqualify you from being able to get better, seek help, level up in any way, shape, or form. And I started to see, as I started to get deeper into the mental health journey, how many people are actually faking it. How many people were covering and burning out at the same time. The covering took so much energy. Becoming someone else took so much energy that by the time they really wanted to show and express a version of themselves that was authentic, they didn't even feel comfortable doing so. So they reverted back to the version that they created, that they believed everyone else liked and appreciated. And they really, really lost themselves in that version and that cover, that costume that they put on. And I started to see, and I'm different points of my life. I'm a multimedia producer now, but I was a reporter at one point. So I've interviewed LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Derek Jeter. I've been in press conferences, and I start to see one underlying common denominator. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter what your background is, where you came from, what you've been through. Everybody deals with some form of mental health, whether it's good or bad, whether it's inclining, increasing, or declining and decreasing, some way, shape, or form they deal with it. And it doesn't matter how good you are at something, you still will face it at some point. Most people face imposter syndrome when they get to certain levels. Dang, this is pretty high up. I didn't ever expect it to be here. Now people have all these expectations because I'm so good at this thing. I can't say that I'm going to do something else because people have emotionally locked me into being this thing in this avenue. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with athletes across the country and just asking them several questions. And one big question, how do you deal with the expectations of others? And some have great answers and say, well, it doesn't matter, because that's the way I believe. I don't care what anybody else thinks, because the second you start caring about other people's thoughts, that's the cage that you put yourself in, and you are no longer free.
Yeah,
Jump in.
Sorry, can I speak to that really quick? I figured out that the hard way. If you depend so much on what others think, like, you're not going to be able to fully be yourself. It took me years to admit that I have a problem, like with anxiety and depression, and all those years too, I was living uh, like in the expectations of others and not being myself. Like I was in that cage. And once I feel like it was only in the last year that I learned to let go and actually kind of step out of my comfort zone and try to be my authentic self.
Let me ask you, Travis, what was the turning point for you?
Honestly, the turning point for me was, so I had a seizure disorder for years now, and last year it came back full force. Like before that, for years it was just like 1 or 2 seizures a year, and then it was pretty much came back, and I had like 30 seizures within like probably 2 weeks. Spent some time in the hospital, and I was down. I have 3 young kids, and it was like, if this keeps up, a couple of things are going to be like happen. Like I'm not going to be able to provide for my family. I may not be here because my health is declining, and when my like physical health declines, my mental health also goes. So there was a point at the end of last year where I was dissociating and having suicidal thoughts and stuff. And that was the point where I was like, you know what? I'm done. It was kind of just awakening. And the funny thing is I feel like I've had multiple awakenings throughout my life. But this is the one where I decided, like, you know what? It doesn't matter what it takes now. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to do what I have to improve my physical and mental health.
Man, Travis, I commend you, brother. That's incredible. And I'm sure somebody listening is inspired by that, because a lot of people don't make it back from that. A lot of people never get to the point that, and to say, like, you know what, I'm going to figure out a way to win. That's a lot. I don't want to gloss over that. Like, that's a lot to deal with, and to have children at that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work, but I firmly believe that, like, I'm like you. I am a big believer, and with God in my life, like, I know that He's going to be there to help me out in wherever I need that help. He's watching over me, and it's because of Him that I was able to get out of the rut that I was in.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you said that, because I'm the type of person, anywhere I go, I have a conversation, I have to give it back to God, because I can count, and I'm sure you can do the same thing, how many times I've almost died and God's hand was all through it. And more importantly, His hand was locked into my mind, keeping me at peace in some very tumultuous situations, and not knowing what was going to happen, but having that base that was, you know what, regardless of what happens, He's got me. That's difficult, and that's
and
powerful.
and living in with like some of those near death experiences, I'm sure like you totally feel that there's a purpose that you're still here. Like and you're doing it, you're helping people out.
No, absolutely. I literally was telling this story earlier today about the time where I almost died on December 25th, 2017. I had two massive pulmonary embolisms. Doctor said the one in my left lung people have died from. She's seen it, but she said the one in my right lung was bigger, and they just didn't know how I was alive. And she said, I don't know how you survived that. And it was one of those things where you look back, she said, you should be dead right now. And I said to her, I can't go until I finish what God has for me to do. And that is a mental health fortifying machine because it's based on purpose. I think a lot of things that really hurt people and why depression gets a lot of people is because they feel that they don't have purpose beyond what's happening to them. And I know what that feels like and what that sounds like and what that looks like. And I know for a fact it was the purpose that illuminated my ambition to keep going. When I felt and knew what my purpose was, I then started to attack life with vigor and with aggression because I had somewhere to go. I had somewhere to be, and I had a reason to keep going. What happens a lot is like, your mind will play tricks on you and say, this isn't going to work out. Well, you don't have the energy to do that. You don't have the health to do that. There's no point of doing this. And then it starts to beat down over time. It's not something that happens immediately. It's this constant hit that happens like a trickle over and over that withers away at your faith and your confidence until you start to believe the doubt. But when you start to when you find and have the purpose, you go from doubting one way to doubting another way.
Mm-hmm.
And before the purpose, you doubt that things are going to work out. After the purpose, you doubt that you can be stopped. You doubt that there's nothing. I doubt that anything could come against me. And that is the beauty behind what God puts into your mind and how he starts to infuse and starts to develop, because it's that literal purpose that pulls you out of the dumps. It pulled me out of the dumps several times.
Yeah, I'm right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right there. I'm right there with you. It's just pulled me out several times. Because there were times where like I feel like I was losing my faith to like, even go on. I didn't know what the future held. And it was like, every time that happened, I was reprimanded in one way or another, saying, you know what, like you're going to lose it all if you don't do something about it and change your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It changes your life. It changes the circumstances, and it also when you start to move in a certain way, it starts to change your atmosphere. Because I know you've heard this several times, and the listeners probably heard it as well. There's something happens when you make a decision. Everything else gets out of your way. When you make a decision, everything else gets out of your way. And people like to say, oh, the universe goes into alignment. Nah, that's God giving you the head nod and saying, go ahead. And it's built on that purpose. And we can fight and defeat depression and anxiety if we find purpose. That's what I believe. If we find purpose, anxiety and depression and imposter syndrome are they can't do anything, because the purpose outweighs everything. And a fantastic story that I heard, I went to this a vision a seminar a couple months ago, and one of the speakers on the first day, he gave this scenario to somebody, a young woman in the crowd, and she was there with her son, and he didn't know that the guy next to her was her son at first. And he said, let me ask you a question. I'll give you $10 million, but we have to play a game. The game is, I'm not going to look at you, but I have a gun, imaginary gun, and I'm going to turn around and point it in your direction aimlessly. I'm not even going to look. If I hit you, if I don't hit you, you get $10 million. If I hit you, you're dead. Would you want to do that? The lady said, no, I'm not playing that game because if you end up hitting me, I'm done. She said, okay. And her son jokingly said, well, I don't mind if she plays the game because I'll get the $10 million as her successor. And everybody starts laughing, right? And he goes, oh, wait, is that your son? She goes, yeah, that's my son, not my favorite right now, as you can probably see. And he goes, okay, I'll play another game with you. Now I'm facing you and I'm pointing the gun at your son and you have a choice. I'm aiming it at him. This bullet is going to hit him. What are you going to do? The mother said, I'm jumping in front of that bullet. You're not hitting my son. And he said, what changed? And she's like, I don't know. I didn't want him to die. He said, your purpose changed. He said, there was no purpose behind the first one and you didn't want to take a chance. But even though you were still afraid of this, it's the same bullet. You were still afraid, but the purpose was different. So the purpose outweighed what you were afraid of. And when he said that, man, when I tell you, I almost passed out of my seat because it was so powerful to see and the whole room felt it. And the power of purpose is matchless. It can defeat anything. I 100% wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's kind of back to what I was saying, like with my health problems. I feel like my kids and my wife gave me that purpose to continue to live on and like better myself.
And that's the beauty, man, because we think most times that we're going through the emotions of just, let's do what we're supposed to do. Get married, have kids, have a great job, go on vacation, spend time, take the pictures, make the memories. And we see it, the purpose and useful use case through those lenses. But we often forget about, God is the master chess player. He's the grand master of all. He plans moves 5-10 years ahead. And you collide with the moves that he's already put in place. This is not checkers. We play checkers because we can only see what in front of us, but he's playing chess. So he knew that you needed that purpose for those moments. So he planted your wife and those kids before those moments even came, knowing that there will come a time they will serve multiple purposes in your life. They will fulfill multiple things. But one of the greatest purposes they serve or they fulfill is that moment when you needed them, where they didn't really actually do anything specific, but their existence gave you what you needed to overcome the impossible. And that's where I look at life and I look at things, because it's really incredible when you start to see the different plans of what happens, especially when it pertains to your mental health, because a lot of people they take it for granted until they're in trouble. They're in trouble, then things start to come to the forefront. They pay attention. But if you look ahead and you set your mind on the things above and you start to see life from a different perspective and you start to see the little things that have purpose, that are important, your perspective changes and you actually fortify yourself mentally in a way that a lot of people don't, because their mind is so fixated on how can I win? How can I make more money? How can I find more success? How can I get that dopamine hit of success that will surpass, everything else in my life? And they search for that dopamine hit and that drug hit of appraisal from other people, especially through social media, that they fail to look and notice the specific purposes of things in their lives, man. So, man, that's incredible to hear from you on your part.
And I do have a question for you. I want to go back to your near-death experiences. How did those experiences change your perspective on life?
Well, first off, it had me understand how quickly everything can be over. And knowing that you don't have as much time as you believe you do, kind of changes the sense of urgency of the things you want to accomplish or the things you want to achieve. The second thing it did was ground me in my faith and purpose. If I can survive all those times, and I've seen so many other people die, that means I am here for a purpose. And I'm going to live my life on purpose to collide with that. And when it is my time, I live my life with no regrets now. When it is my time, I'm going to be incredibly happy because it's a freeing mental way of going about things that I'm no longer bound by the fear of what could happen. I'm not afraid to die. It's the ultimate graduation for people that believe. It's the ultimate promotion, yeah.
I love that. Live life on purpose.
Yeah.
I really like that saying.
Yeah, because Travis, when you think about it, most people live life on the principles of the ideal. What is the ideal of success? Let me ask you a question, Travis. Could you ever actually be at the horizon? Could you ever be literally at the horizon?
I would say no.
No, you absolutely can't.
Yeah, like it's
impossible.
To me, the horizon changes. Like it's
yes, and that's exactly the second you take a step towards the horizon, simultaneously it takes a step away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same way I tell people all the time, and I tell my students all the time, you have to stop basing your success on the horizon mentality. I will consider myself successful when I achieve this. I will consider myself mentally strong when I get to this point. And instead, you have to look at life in retrospect. Where were you and where are you? Where did you come from and where are you now? And when you look at life based on how much you've overcome, shout out to the Overcome podcast,
mm-hmm.
You start to really see how much you've achieved. That's what success really is. Success is the collection of things that you've experienced and learned the most from and ultimately overcome.
I love it. I love it. So, sorry, my thought just escaped me.
Nah, it's all good, man.
My mind is like one of those moments where my mind just like went blank.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do have a question for you, man. Like,
yeah, go for it.
You created this podcast. What was your thought process? What was the defining moment in the thought process that helped you create this podcast?
Like I've had this idea for this podcast for probably at least a year or two. And the thought process was just, I want a place where people can come on and tell their stories. Like it's kind of goes back to what you said, like everybody has like mental health issues for the most part, like, or maybe if they're not going through it themselves, they're familiar with somebody who has it. And I wanted to create a safe place for them to come on and tell me their story, because I know I have a story, but I'm only one person. I can't, like, I want you to hear everybody else's story, and hopefully just have that one person at some point reach out and say, you know what, you changed me. Like this episode really got to me and made me be able to push forward through life. But it took me years to actually, well, about a year to actually get my feet on the ground and do it. And I think that goes back to what you mentioned before. I felt a sense of imposter syndrome, like I wasn't good enough to actually start it, that I wouldn't get anywhere. And then I actually heard a podcast, and the guy, it was a podcast on podcasting, and he said that if you have a message, then do it. Like if you have a microphone, that's the first step. And as soon as you get behind that microphone, like you need to get over yourself. And it doesn't matter if you mess up. It doesn't matter if you're the best speaker. You just need to throw it out there because somebody is going to listen. So I kind of took those words of wisdom into account. And like at the beginning of the year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to throw myself in this. I'm going to do it. And so I'm still pretty early on in the podcasting world, but I'm happy to be here and just want to keep building.
Man, I commend you. That's incredible, man. And I can't wait to see where you end up, because this is such a powerful platform that you've created. One thing I did want to mention, and I would love your thoughts on it as well, is one thing that's big that I go into the communities and talk a lot about, is men's mental health. We don't talk enough about it because there aren't enough safe spaces for it. And men die by suicide more than women. The rates are astronomical every year. And yet we're the last, we're the last people to go after therapy, and the first to cover, and the first to act like everything is okay even when we're in pain, and the first to shut down a safe space because it's seen as weak. So when you think about men's mental health, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
For me, I believe that it's the society that has created kind of this place where, men don't have the strength to come forward because it makes them look bad. And I believe though that it's I'm trying to think how to word it. And I believe there's still such a stigma to it. But it's like this kind of rut that we have to get over and just keep pushing forward to get more people to come out and talk about their issues with mental health. And and I think one of the hardest parts though is being vulnerable, being able to actually open up and say, you know what, I have this problem. I suffer from depression. I think it all goes back to like the stigma with mental health, and it's like, and maybe it could also be a generational thing. Like I was, in my family, sorry if anybody in my family is listening, but we didn't really talk about mental health. I don't really know anybody's viewpoints on it too much, but then I have my wife and some of her family members that are pretty open about it, and so I feel like that's made me, I'm not afraid to do it. Like I don't, and I think we care so much about what everybody else thinks. Something that needs to stop.
I agree, and it needs to stop. And I think, generations have gone by with this stigma of, if you're not completely broken in some way physically, what are you really complaining about? If you have a roof over your head and food on the table and clothes on your back, what are you complaining about? And for a long time, it's been seen as dealing with my mental health is seen as being selfish or ungrateful, which is completely inaccurate. It's actually, you're actually making yourself better for your family. But a lot of people don't understand that. They think you should be fine. Like, you got a good job, you got a good income, you got a family, you got beautiful wife, beautiful kids. A lot of people don't have the stuff that you have. You shouldn't be complaining. And they
Yeah, and
miss, they miss the fact that I'm not complaining. I'm looking for help. That doesn't mean everything is perfect.
exactly. And I feel like there's such a pressure on us in life in general to go do things a certain way, to stick to a mold. And if you don't follow that mold, or if you go against it, like, you're a problem. And it's like, no, like, you need to do what you have to do to survive.
Yep. No, I'm with you. Like, I'm the type of person, I do not care what anybody else thinks. I cannot waste my time with the thoughts of other people, because I can't allow them to affect me that way if what I'm doing has nothing to do with them and it doesn't affect them in any way. That's like drinking poison and waiting for somebody else to die.
And one thing that really helped me, like, on my journey with, like, mental health, was figuring out how to have the right attitude.
Mm.
So like, it has to be the right attitude. Like, if I'm going somewhere and, like, it's like, oh, I don't want to do therapy. I don't want to take the steps and fill out this paper to, help me out. I want to do breath work. And if I'm just negative about it all the time, like, I know some of this stuff sucks to go through. I've been through it. But if I change my attitude and look at it like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to do this. It doesn't matter. And push through it and have a good attitude about it, it just makes things so much easier.
Absolutely. And on top of that, once you change your attitude and you change how and who you communicate to, it's over. When I'm a big person on how to communicate effectively. And one ways that I teach is how to communicate directly, how to explain without feeling responsible for somebody else's feelings, and how to own it while you are still developing it. Because a lot of people think that you have to let me get good before I do what I need to. No, you get good as you start to do it and simultaneously go after it.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yes. And so many people miss that because they want to be perfect or good enough, and they miss the whole point. Good enough is a mental state of being. It's a feeling. It's not something that actually is. It's a feeling. I feel good enough, meaning I feel secure about where I am and what I can do when it comes to this situation. So now I'll do it. Instead, if you communicate effectively, so first thing people have to do is you have to understand, all right, who are the biggest culprits in your life? When it comes to your mental health, who's affecting you the most? All right, once you have that, and make a list. I'm a big believer of lists and breaking stuff down so that you have a physical copy of things so you can see it. You make the list of the people that are affecting your mental health the most, and then you start to, next to their names, I've gone as far as putting each person's name on a sheet of paper, and then to start defining what is it that they say or do that makes your mental health decline or incline. What is it that they say or do? If they're pulling away and they're damaging your mental health, what is it that they say or do that makes it worse? And you write those things down. And you start to see, okay, with David, every time I talk to David, He's always negative. He's always pessimistic. I may be excited at things, but the second I say something to him, it gets shut down, destroyed, and I just can't do it. The other part of that I add, and I make sure I tell people, is, okay, what relationship do you have to that person? Who is that person to you? So if David is my boss, and I can't do anything, or Jake or Jack or whoever, all right, what's the dynamic there? And when you start to define those things, then you start to get to the solution portion, which is, okay, I have no other choice but to communicate. So how am I going to do it? Because, and I always tell my players and my students when I coach them, you cannot give yourself a choice whether or not you're going to do this, because you've already lived the life of not taking action on this. You're going through it right now. The reason why you're suffering in silence is because you haven't communicated yet, or the communication that you have isn't strong enough or good enough. Or worst case scenario, you have communicated, but they've disrespected you, and they are not abiding by the rules, in which you now have a responsibility to make a decision that's in your best interest to increase your mental health. But when people have to go through that sequence, and I always teach it over and over again, because once you start to realize, okay, I get anxious or I get depressed around Sally because she just sucks all the air out of the room. I can't be around that every single time. And I have no choice because she's my coworker and I sit next to her. She's on my team. And I've tried to encourage her, but she's not getting the hint. And I can't get rid of her because she doesn't report to me or anything like that. And I can't fire her. She hasn't really done anything wrong. It's just difficult. The solution, you have to have a conversation with Sally. Sally, lately you sound like there's other things that are bothering you, but I have to be honest with you. I believe it's starting to affect me as well. I don't know if you're doing that intentionally, but how can we work together to help you improve or to change? Now, you think that sometimes a lot of people think that's a conversation only for their leaders and their bosses. No, that's for you too. Because you have to be the leader of your space and your mental health. You have to be the boss of that. You have to manage that. That is your direct report. That is your direct report, the person that's on your team. Because if you don't deal with it, somebody else is going to affect it in multiple ways, and we can only handle what's in our control. So that's the framework I give people and start to map it out, because it ensures that you address the problem and address the person. Because most of the time it's a person. And when it's not a person and it's a circumstance, circumstances can be altered with communication with a person every single time.
I love it. Yeah, and in ways you have to say something, because over time I've dealt with people in the workforce. They're just difficult to work with. And if you don't say something, somebody's eventually going to blow up, or you're just going to be miserable day in and day out working with that person. And one thing that has really helped me in the years, like with that type of situation, is trying to build a relationship with my coworkers from day one.
There we go.
Love it. What would you say is like our most like valuable asset in life?
Mm. Ooh. Our most valuable asset in life is your belief. It's what you believe. And we said this earlier in the podcast. I'm a believer in God. You're a believer in God. It's the thing that keeps us grounded. It's the thing that gives me purpose. That your purpose is rooted in your belief. And without belief, you wander aimlessly with no direction, no instruction, just going through the motions, as people like to call it. Your biggest asset that you could fortify is what you believe about yourself, what you believe about your future, what you believe about your family, and what you believe about the circumstances that you find yourself in. Because there's a difference between somebody that believes that they can overcome and those that believe that they'll never make it. You see it in the actions that people take. People's actions, all of it, are based on what they believe deep down. So some people have liabilities as beliefs, and they lose money, metaphorical money, life money, we'll call it.
Life money.
They lose it and they run out of it and they hemorrhage it because they believe a certain thing. I'll never lose weight because I'll never be able to get to this country because, and what you continue to believe is exactly what happens. That's why people say, watch what you say, because it will become true.
Mm-hmm.
Because the words that are spoken are based on a belief.
Yep. It's like, going back just like to the mental health side of things, like before this last year, I've never been like huge fan of like affirmations. And I think they work better for some people than they do for others. Like it's kind of iffy for me, but there's certain ones that have helped me. But if I sit there and tell myself, you know what, I can do this. I can do this. I'm good enough. Eventually, I'm going to start believing it. And whatever it is that I am saying that about, it's going to happen.
I believe it 100% too. I'm with you. I actually created a nighttime affirmations audio because there was a doctor, I forget his name. He started to talk about how you can subconsciously program the mind right before you go to sleep, because it's the subconscious mind that holds the 90% of your systems. And when people talk about affirmations out loud, when they're conscious, it has to pass the conscious mind. And when you say it over and over, it then goes into the subconscious. But when you go to sleep, right before you go to sleep, if you listen to a subconscious program, the one I created is it's overcoming fear and doubt. And you sit there and you listen to it right before you fall asleep. And while you fall asleep, it's feeding that into your subconscious, because that's the brain that's intact, that's working, that's front and center. I call it the night crew. They're the night crew, cleaning up everything, fixing everything, running the systems in the background while your eyes are shut off. You know, all the main systems, your mind is shut down, is in sleep mode. And when you play these science-based, this subconscious program, it starts to feed into, okay, you start to naturally believe things because you're not having to, there's no filter. It's just feeding right into it. So I just listen to it all the time. And then you find yourself repeating it and saying it over and over again and start to believe. Your actions start to be different. You start to then push and say, oh shoot, well, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. Oh yeah, and that people try to hack it to be like, I attract money. I attract this. I'm not necessarily, I'm not against that, but I'm not 100% for that, because there's a system that has to happen with that. Like, you have to have structure in order to obtain and sustain money. But the strength in the subconscious program, in my opinion, is based in the rooted ideologies of your mind, of what you believe. So yes, I am better. I'm not afraid to take risk. I'm intellectual. I like to read. I like those little things that you want to become. You continue to feed that to your mind, and you naturally, your emotions are tailored in that direction because you've been saying it. That's why propaganda is so dangerous.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah,
All embedded in our head.
exactly. That's literally subconscious work right in front of you.
Yeah, and that's exactly why there's certain things I can't watch anymore.
Amen to that, bro.
Or read.
Yep.
What? Hey, I mean, this is just a pretty kind of general question, but I love to ask this question. What advice would you give anybody that's struggling with mental health issues right now?
Well, first thing we gotta identify. First, before we do that, we have to agree on one thing. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to start with honesty with yourself, because you've already been practicing something that's not true, a lie. And that is the belief that where you are now feels like you're never going to get out of it. I know for a fact that you will if you keep going. But I also know that it'll take longer if you're not honest with yourself. So once you achieve, you know what? I am going through something. I am struggling. This does suck. I'm not happy with where I am in life. Then you get that honesty is the thing that frees you. The true self, know the truth, and the true self set you free. It frees you because you're being honest. And once you are honest, then let's start to pinpoint the things that make you feel the worst. This is difficult work. It's hard to do. But knowing the things that make you feel worse can help you unpack some things that maybe you haven't unpacked. And we have to do the difficult work up front to have the strength and the stamina to sustain you, this version of you that's better, that doesn't feel depressed, that doesn't feel anxious, that doesn't feel like an imposter or fake or not good enough. You got to deal with that stuff, the tough stuff up front, so that it gets easier later. So once you identify and do those things, the last thing I'll say is don't expect ups and downs. Like, don't expect everything to be up and up once you start to realize, okay, I got it. I'm good. I got purpose. I'm moving forward. Don't expect things to be great forever, but do expect your ability to overcome to increase, because it takes consistency, it takes work, it takes commitment, and it takes a whole lot of faith and belief that you are going to be better. And that happens when you go through experiences and overcome them. Every time you see yourself overcome something, it builds it's that layer that's on the foundation of, I can do this. I'm not going to be a failure. I've already succeeded at something else. Those experiences allow you to be 10 times better, or even 1% better each and every day, 5% better each and every obstacle and experience you get through. So doing those things will absolutely change your life, and more importantly, give you the necessary stamina you need to pull yourself out and eventually help somebody else get out.
Yeah. When you hit right on the money, what happened with me, like, it was taking a step back and realizing that I had a problem. I had to be honest with myself and say, I'm going through this, because I don't feel like I feel like before that, like, it was like every time I just take a step forward, it'd be like 3 or 4 steps back, and I'd just be stuck.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's hard. because once we start feeling the momentum of success and feeling better, we never want it to end. But if it doesn't end, we don't really learn. We
Very
learn
true.
way more in failure than we ever do in success. So it's important to really ground yourself in like, hey, I'm going to enjoy this now, but I'm not going to pretend that it's always supposed to be like this.
Yeah. It's just basically learning the different techniques and tools you can use to cope with the bad. It's really
Absolutely.
what it comes down to, like, for me anyways, is like, I know the depression is not going to go away. I know the anxiety is not going to leave me. Like, I just have to learn how to recognize when it's coming on and take a step back, take a couple breaths, count, breathe, whatever it is that I do in those moments to move forward.
That's right, man.
Is there anything that you'd like to bring up that we did not discuss that you can?
No, I thought we had an incredible conversation, and I'm just grateful to even have this honor to be talking with you, Travis, because what you're doing is an incredible work and it's going to help a lot of people. So I'm honored to
hoping
be
so.
part of.
I'm hoping so. I'm glad you were on the show. I'm really grateful that you came on. It's amazing to get to meet so many people. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on TikTok, Coach Jon McLeod. On Instagram, same thing, Coach Jon McLeod. And I have a book on Amazon, 7-Day Mental Reset, and how to shift your mind. Start the process of shifting your mind into a more positive way in just 7 days. And I have a second, it's a workbook. And I have a second workbook coming in for leaders. It's called Grit and Growth. The playbooks and the plays for leaders to be mentally fortified and much better. So that book is coming out. And then last but not least, my audio books with my positive subconscious nighttime recordings is going to be on Audible soon. So I'm working to try to help as many people as I possibly can and help fortify and strengthen their minds.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jon. Please follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Overcome Pod. We post on every major podcast platform, Spotify, Apple, you name it, we're probably on there. The best thing you can do for us is, share our content, like us, follow us, subscribe, whatever it is that you do. And thank you all for listening. Until next time.